In this video, I'll show why it's useful to throw on a raised wheelhead. But first, we'll take a look in the kiln. I make these videos for students at the college, but here I'm showing you my home studio. At school, we fire stoneware. At home, I fire dense earthenware. I fire earthenware clay to cone 2 in an electric kiln. I've been making bowls for charity, for empty bowls that benefits the local food shelf. I use this treadle wheel that I built in undergraduate school many years ago. I don't own a potter's wheel with a motor. This one has a cast iron flywheel, and compared to a Leach-style treadle wheel, it drives like a big old Cadillac. A light flywheel almost starts and stops at each end of the crankshaft throw, but this wheel runs very smoothly. Here I'm throwing on the wheelhead, and you can see that I'm kind of hunched over, and I have to bend over quite a long way in order to see what I'm doing. And here you can see me throwing on a raised wheelhead. I'll show what this is later. You can see that I'm sitting much more upright, and my forearms are essentially parallel to the floor, and this is much more comfortable. If I want to make something that's tall, I can throw on the wheelhead and make something as high as my elbow bend. I rarely do that though, because I mostly make pots for your kitchen and for your dining room. Throwing like this is a bit like throwing off the hump, where you're just working at the top of a large piece of clay, making modest-sized pieces. I actually find throwing pots one at a time on the wheelhead to be preferable to throwing off the hump most of the time. Just because your wheelhead is at a certain height doesn't mean it has to stay there. Now, some people would say that I throw very slowly, and I suppose that's true. I more or less throw and trim at one speed. Rather than throw slowly, I actually think that I throw at the speed my wheel goes, and I'm not in a rush anyway. Being in a hurry all the time doesn't actually make sense when you're doing this in a way that you pay close attention to what you're doing and in a way that is kind of gentle. So I'm coaxing the clay rather than machining the clay. Even though I'm throwing slowly, it takes less than 2.5 minutes for me to make this bowl. That's fast enough. This really isn't a throwing or trimming video. I just want you to pay attention to the way I'm sitting at the wheel. I'm going to switch back and forth between throwing on the wheelhead and throwing at this raised wheelhead height in a moment. It's interesting to watch yourself work, and I wouldn't ever do this if I weren't making videos for my students. One thing that you can note is that I move all the time when I'm working on this wheel, much more so than working on an electric wheel. My leg is also always moving, that's for sure. So this is just like throwing on the wheelhead. It's just raised up, where it's easier for me to reach. Here I'm throwing on the wheelhead, and you can see how far I have to lean over and how hunched up I am in order to see what I'm doing. And I'll switch and show the same part of making a bowl with the wheelhead raised, and I'm sitting much more upright and don't have to lean over so far in order to work. Here I'm trimming excess clay from the base of the pot at the wheelhead height. And here I'm doing the same thing with the raised wheelhead. It's much easier. I often throw on a bat even when I pick the pots up. So there's the bat coming off. And I'll show you the raised wheelhead that I use. It's an old cast iron wheelhead, although you could just use a bat. And it's epoxied to a piece of plumbing pipe from the home center. And I just stick this on the wheelhead the same as you would anything else. I'm going to center the wheelhead more or less just because I'm making a video and I don't want to make you dizzy. So it only takes a minute to change the height of my wheelhead. Here I'm ready to go on the next bowl. You can see that I have a sponge leaning against the side of the wheelhead, and that's to catch the water before it flies off. I do the same thing when I use an electric wheel without a splash pan. Splash pans just get in the way most of the time. I'm throwing recycled clay. This is a mixture of porcelain and bee clay. You can see in this view that my forearms are essentially parallel to the wheelhead or parallel to the ground, and this prevents me from having to lean over to throw. Most of my students are young and have invincible bodies, but as you get older, or if you do this quite a bit, you have to pay attention to the small things like your posture in order to be able to continue doing the things that you love. I'm also basically lazy, and I just want to make everything as easy as possible. I'm leaving in a good chunk of this video so you can see that even though the wheel is going quite slow, I don't think it affects the way that I throw a great deal. Most people actually have the wheel going much faster than is necessary in order to make a good pot. Some people think that throwing slowly gives the pieces more of a gestural quality, and I know that I can make the same kind of pot on this wheel or any electric wheel, either tight or very loose depending on what I'm after. The wheel doesn't make the pots, you do. If I'm throwing on an electric wheel at the college, I oftentimes find myself with the wheel speed going faster and faster, and it's as if you become an appendage to the machine as opposed to the one in control of the machine. This may help explain why I prefer this kind of wheel. I'm a romantic, I suppose, but realistically, this is the way I want to spend my day, rather than attached to a motor. Next, I'm going to show trimming on a chuck, and I have shown this kind of chuck in other videos. It's basically more plumbing fixtures from the home center with a piece of clay on top. And I trim on a chuck rather than the wheelhead almost every time. There's a number of good reasons to trim on a chuck. If you're throwing porcelain and you trim on the wheelhead, you risk cracking the rim by pressing down on it, especially if the rim is warped at all. I trim on a chuck for the speed. It actually is much faster to put a pot on the chuck than it is to try and anchor it to the wheelhead somehow. Here I'm just dampening the piece of clay on top of the chuck to get the pot to stick for a minute or two. And when I put the pot on, it's essentially already centered, I just check the rim with my finger. If the rim is level, then the foot is level as well. I just sharpened my trimming tool with a file. You can see the shiny edge. Trimming porcelain helps to have a really sharp tool. Trimming on this raised chuck, my forearms are horizontal and relaxed just like they were when I was throwing. I don't have my elbows locked in or my arms stiff. Rather than try and hold my arms stiff, I just touch the pot lightly as I trim, and that stabilizes the trimming tool. Even though the wheel's going fairly slowly, you can see the clay comes right off the pot. How you use the tools is more important than how fast the wheel is going. It probably takes about the same amount of time to trim the pot as it did to throw it. And of course, one of the main benefits of trimming on a chuck is you can take the pot off and see how much more you need to trim and just pop it right back on again. You don't have to monkey around with how you secure the thing to the wheel head. I hope this has been interesting. You get to see a little bit of my home studio, and pretty soon I'll be back at school where we'll be making some more videos to help my beginning students. Now that we've got this done, we can go unload the kiln. It's cooled off now. Again, most of these pots are bowls that get donated. Lots of people like the bright colors of oxidation firing. This bowl is red earthenware clay with white slip and an amber glaze. I hope you found something useful in this video. Of course, I think everyone should try throwing on a raised wheel head and trimming on a chuck that's up in the air and see how it goes. You should always have tests of something new in every kiln.